Archduke Farron Aldrich owns the loudest house in the empire, and today he's decided that a boy named Corin Vale doesn't get to have one at all. In a courtyard packed with 40 witnesses, Aldrich men pin Corin's hand to a table, file the Vale sigil clean off his bronze crest, and press the smoothed, blank disc back into his fist like a receipt for everything he just lost. Farron doesn't even raise his voice while it happens, because in this city his silence already counts as law. But that night, alone in a rented loft above a tannery, Corin wakes up burning, and something answers that no healer in the Empire has ever survived carrying, a 0.01% class that makes him stronger every single time a crowd watches him get humiliated. The men who erased his house just became his only fuel, and he intends to burn every last one of them with it. 60 days from now, he walks into the capital's ranking hall under a standing order that nobody is allowed to even look at him, takes the Empire's top spot anyway, and makes sure the whole world watches him do it. Back up to the morning it starts. Corin Vale stands on the Aldrich flagstones at 18, straight-backed, gray eyes level, wearing plain clothes kept so clean it looks almost like a dare aimed at everyone watching him. 2 Aldrich clerks, men he's never spoken a word to, pin his hand flat against a stone table and set a rasp to the Vale sigil stamped into his crest. They grind the metal down slowly, in full view, until it's nothing but a smooth bronze blank, while 40 witnesses in their best coats stand close enough to hear it and say absolutely nothing. His father's name comes off in a thin curl of copper dust and a smell like a struck coin, and nobody in that courtyard moves to stop it. Farron Aldrich doesn't raise his voice, because in 30 years he's never once had to. He tells Corin, almost gently, that a name is only ever what enough witnesses agree to call you, and that today every person in this courtyard has agreed to call him nothing at all. The crowd nods along like a congregation taking communion, because agreeing with Farron Aldrich out loud is the cheapest insurance anyone in the capital can buy. A few of them even manage small, apologetic smiles, as if that makes it kinder. Corin says exactly one thing back, quiet and flat, no anger in it at all. He asks Farron to remember, clearly, that he said that in front of this many people. Corin walks out through a gate that used to swing open for his family on sight, and now only opens because the guard on duty is bored and wants him gone. On the road below the Aldrich estate, tenant farmers who still work Old Vale land spot the blank disc clenched in his fist and lower their eyes fast, ashamed on his behalf, even though none of this was their doing. One of them, a wiry old grain hauler named Bevan, who used to haul grain for Corin's father, stops his cart just long enough to press a heel of black bread into Corin's hand. He mutters, low enough that no Aldrich rider will hear it, that a struck name still has to eat same as anybody. Corin takes the bread without a word, because pride is a luxury, and this morning he's just been priced out of it completely. He sleeps that night in a rented loft above a tannery, the blank crest still cold against his chest, and right at the hour the candle finally drowns in its own wax, his skin starts to burn from the inside out. 12 small black marks rise along his forearm like fresh tally scratches cut into the skin, and with them a cold, precise line of understanding opens up inside his head, uninvited. A voice that is somehow only his own thought, but sharpened into something colder, names the thing plainly, testimony, and it lays out the rule exactly once, and never once softens it afterward. He grows in power only when other people watch him get humiliated, and the math is brutally simple. More witnesses watching means more power gained. But every single gain brands one permanent mark onto his skin, 100 marks total, and there are no refunds and no way to undo one once it's set. It gives him exactly one warning before it goes quiet, and offers no explanation with it. The 100th mark is not like the 99 that come before it, and as far as it knows, no one has ever lived long enough to say what it actually does. Corin counts the marks in the dark, 12 exactly, and he already knows precisely where every one of them came from. 12 people this morning held his eyes just long enough to pity him openly, and the class fed itself on exactly that moment, nothing more and nothing less. He runs the ugly arithmetic without flinching, the same way you'd check whether a wound is merely bleeding or actually gushing. 88 marks of room still left before the limit. 60 days he doesn't know yet that he even has, and the only fuel that exists in this whole empire is held almost entirely by the men who hate him most. Before he trusts a class built on shame, he tests it like a man biting a coin, wanting to feel the cheat before it costs him anything real. He walks into the tannery yard at dawn, drops a sack of hides at his own feet, and lets the crew laugh at the noble boy who can't carry his own load. 6 workers snicker, 6 new marks he does not receive, and that absence teaches him something. The rule isn't about laughing. It's about being witnessed, brought low, and a dropped sack doesn't rate low enough to count. Only when the foreman spits that a veil scrubbing skins is exactly where a struck name belongs, and the yard goes quiet and ugly watching him take the insult without flinching, does the system finally answer. One mark blackens on his wrist, and Corin stands in the stink of tanning acid, finally understanding the shape of his own leash. 13 of 100, and now he's certain the mechanism is real, not some cruel accident of timing. The burn's pain is real but brief, gone almost as fast as it comes, like a brand that cools fast into something closer to money he can spend later. He learns the cruel edge of it right there in the yard. The gain scales with how many people watch and how much the moment costs him inside, meaning the biggest fuel comes from the biggest degradation delivered before the biggest crowd he can find. That arithmetic sickens him the instant he sees it laid bare. The fastest path forward is also the ugliest one, deliberately chosen and repeated. He hates the plan the moment it forms, and builds it anyway, because 60 days leaves no room for a cleaner one. Bevan finds him at the trough before sunup and tells him plainly that the tenants are being squeezed since the Vale name fell. Aldrich's stewards have doubled the tithe, and no lord stands left to answer for it. That's the first time Corin hears his family's ruin's real stakes said out loud, instead of felt as abstract shame. A struck name means the people who once sheltered under it now stand unprotected. He asks how long they can hold out. Bevan says through winter, maybe, if the frost is kind, and they both know it never is. Corin folds the blank crest into his palm until the edges bite, and tells the old man to hold anyway, the only promise he has left to give. In the Capitol's records hall, a bored scribe who's answered this 100 times explains the one door still open to him, the Ascension Trial. It's the Empire's ranking tournament, held under close watch in the magistrate's court, and its winner earns the one right even a sitting archduke must honor without argument, to compel a noble house to answer a charge in open session, before witnesses who can't be bought or silenced. Corin asks when it's held, keeping the urgency from his voice. The scribe finally looks up and says the counting already began. The clock started the moment the last name was entered. 60 days, the scribe says, sliding the notice across the counter, already reaching for the next petitioner. 60 days to the trial. 13 marks of 100 needed. Corin writes both numbers on his own forearm in charcoal, above the row of black marks already there, so he never gets to pretend he doesn't know where he stands. Both counts move the wrong way at once, one counting down towards 0 with every passing day, the other climbing toward a limit nobody he's heard of has ever lived long enough to reach. From here, the board is never off the screen. It sits behind every conversation, every plan, every hour of sleep he doesn't get. Here's the grim joke inside a filed-off name. A blank crest belongs to nobody in particular, so nobody is invited absolutely everywhere. Corin walks the disc past a merchant house's servant's gate, past a bored checkpoint guard, past a guild clerk who barely glances up, and none can place a face with no crest to give it weight or danger. Where a veil would once have been turned away or quietly arrested for trying, a nothing strolls straight through and listens at the edges of rooms he was never meant to enter. He starts collecting, carefully, everything the Capitol says out loud when it assumes the struck boy in front of it isn't worth watching. What he needs now is crowds and contempt in equal measure, and the Capitol sells both cheap at the public duel rings of the lower city. These ranked exhibition bouts pit status-hungry lesser nobles against rank-hungry commoners, fighting for standing before anyone willing to pay, stands packed with people who came purely to sneer at whoever loses. Corin registers under the blank crest as an unnamed challenger, a request the ringmaster finds so absurd he laughs reading it back. Perfect, Corin thinks, watching the man's contempt settle into the crowd around him. A room full of eyes that already believe, before he's thrown a single punch, that he's beneath every one of them. In the challenger pen, he meets Senna Rule, dark copper hair, river-green eyes, calm the way a drawn blade is calm, the stillness of something that has already decided what it will do if provoked. Low-born and good enough at the work to be resented for it. That skill is the only reason they let her pass the gate at all. The only credential and name like hers is allowed to carry here. She looks at his blank disc first, the way everyone does, then lets her eyes drop to the fresh marks blooming dark on his wrist, and asks the one question nobody else in this whole cruel yard has bothered to ask. What happened to the name that used to sit on that disc? He tells her the truth, flat and unadorned, no softening of the edges, because he's too tired to build a better lie. She doesn't flinch, and she doesn't offer pity, doesn't reach for his hand or his story. It's the first kindness he's been given in a week, and it comes disguised as nothing at all. His first bout is against Halvo Aldrich, a puffed-up third son of a great house who fights like the win was owed to him at birth, like the outcome was decided before either of them drew steel. Corin could take him cleanly, could end it in 3 moves and walk off without a mark. Instead, he does something that costs far more than an honest loss ever could. He lets Halvo disarm him in front of 400 jeering spectators, drops deliberately to one knee, and lets the boy plant a boot square on the blank crest and crow that the veil line is a stain the Empire scrubbed clean from the map. The crowd howls its approval, drunk on the spectacle of a nobody groveling. The shame lands like a hammer swung with both hands, and 11 marks bloom black up his forearm all at once, faster than any single strike has raised them before. 24 of 100 now, bought in a single engineered kneel in front of a paying crowd. Corin stands, retrieves his crest from the dirt where Halvo dropped it, and walks out under a rain of thrown fruit peels without a word to anyone. Senna catches him in the tunnel afterward and says the one thing no one else in the arena worked out watching the same fall. He threw that fight on purpose, and he got stronger doing it. She watched the marks climb his skin in real time and knew exactly what she was seeing. Corin considers lying to her, weighs it for a long moment, looks into those steady green eyes that already know too much, and decides the only ally worth keeping close is one who's already seen straight through him. Senna doesn't recoil from the rule once he lays it bare for her. She turns it over in her mind like a lock she means to pick, examining it from every angle for the mechanism that makes it tick. If the power scales with witnesses, she reasons aloud, then a back-alley humiliation with no one watching is wasted effort, coin thrown into a well. He should never again spend a fall in an empty room when a crowd could be paying for the same wound. She's right, and it's the coldest, most sensible thing anyone has said to him since this whole ordeal began, which makes her useful in a way that also makes her quietly dangerous to know. He warns her plainly that standing too near a man with a struck name is a good way to catch the fallout meant for him. She only says, without blinking, that she's stood near worse than this before. The duel circuit isn't free, and it never was, and the ringmaster who once found Corin's blank disc merely funny now wants a share of the strange draw this unnamed challenger keeps pulling into the stands. Fenric Boyle, fat-fingered, gold-toothed, hopelessly in love with his own ledger and the neat columns of profit it promises, corners Corin about a percentage before he's even cleaned the blood from his hands. Corin has no coin to offer, none at all, so Fenric proposes another toll in its place. Throw the bouts he's told to throw, exactly when he's told to throw them, and in exchange keep his ring privileges a while longer. It's a leash fastened on top of an older leash, one debt braided into another. Corin takes the deal anyway, because right now he needs the crowd, and the marks they buy him, far more than he needs, whatever's left of his pride. That night, Fenric leads Corin through a maze of narrow corridors to a back room to meet the man who really runs the wagering, a silk-voiced fixer called Master Quill, all soft hands and sharper eyes. Quill lays out a proposition, unhurried, and it becomes the first real negotiation of the story. You lose in the 3rd round, on the ground, loud, Quill says, turning a coin over his knuckles like he's already spent it, and I make you rich enough to eat indoors. I don't fight for your book, Corin answers, flat, not moving. Everyone fights for someone's book. Boy, you just haven't met your someone. Then here's mine, Corin says, sliding the blank crest across the table so it stops exactly at Quill's fingers. I lose when it feeds me, and never when it feeds you. Quill studies the blank disc a long moment, weighing it the way he weighs odds, and decides the nobody is more useful uncontrolled than owned. He lets him walk, smiling the whole time, filing the boy away as a problem for later, the kind he intends to solve on his own schedule. Word spreads through the wagering halls that there's a marked nobody who throws bouts in ways the smart money can't predict, and within days a betting pool forms around him overnight, thick with coin and rumor. Gamblers start showing up not to sneer but to guess, clustering at the rail with their ledgers, and guessing isn't the same as witnessing contempt. The class barely twitches on nights they only want a payout. Corin watches the shift happen from the inside of it and learns a hard lesson. A crowd invested in him feeds nothing, because they're rooting, and rooting carries no shame at all, only appetite for coin. He has to find rooms that still hold him beneath them, rooms untouched by odds-making, and the pool has made that search harder in exactly the venues he built with his own bruises, turning his best work against him night after night. Enter Kessadune, an iron-jawed duelist with a scarred lip and a grudge against anyone born softer than her, who's clawed her way up through the low brackets on pure spite and nothing else. She takes one look at the marked boy the crowd can't figure out and decides, right there, that beating him will make her name echo further than any bracket climb could. In the pen, she leans close and tells him she doesn't care what game he's playing, doesn't care about marks or crests or whatever strange arithmetic keeps him standing. She plans to put him down so hard the marks won't matter to anyone watching. Corin, who stopped fearing pain as a concept somewhere in the last 40 days, tells her plainly she's welcome to try, and something in her eyes narrows and sharpens, because she can tell he means it down to the bone. Corin fights Kessa to win this time, because losing to a nobody with a chip on her shoulder earns no contempt worth the marks it might buy. But the fight runs long and vicious, blow after blow, and the crowd falls hopelessly in love with both of them. When she finally goes down, gasping in the dirt, the stands roar for the marked boy like he's a hometown favorite, and not one mark answers his skin, because admiration is not shame, no matter how loud it shouts. He walks out of the ring victorious and starving, having spent a night's blood and every reserve of will for nothing the class can eat or use. The narrator notes the trap tightening around him. The better he fights, the more they respect him, and respect, for Corin, is famine dressed up as triumph. 42 days remain to the trial, 26 marks earned, and the second number has crawled up by only 2 in a hard week of fighting that left him bruised from collar to knuckle. Corin sits in the pen with split knuckles doing the projection that keeps him honest, running the numbers again and again, and it's ugly every time. At 2 marks a week, he doesn't rank in time and never touches Farron, and the tenants go under the ice while he wins pretty, well-loved bouts to a crowd that adores him for all the wrong reasons. He needs a fall so public and so degrading that no amount of rooting can dress it up or cheer it into something survivable, and he needs it soon, before the arithmetic buries everyone he's counting. Kessa finds him after, expecting to hate him, and instead is annoyed that she doesn't. She tells him the crowd only loves a fighter until he grovels, and if he wants to be despised, he should stop being good at anything. Contempt only sticks to a man who refuses to be forgiven. It's crude and it's exactly right, and it's the second time a low-born woman has read his class better than any noble ever managed. He doesn't tell her the rule. He doesn't tell her anything, in fact, just listens and lets her think she's scoring points off a fool. But he files her contempt away as a resource, filed alongside the merchants and the guards and every other useful sneer, and she leaves not quite sure why she just helped the man she came to ruin. Corin engineers his next fall off the circuit entirely, at the Silk Exchange, where a spice merchant named Aldous Pell has been mocking struck houses for weeks, flattering the Aldrichs loudly enough that half the market has learned to laugh along with him. Corin walks the blank disc into Pell's stall himself, and lets the man make a public performance of it, refusing to sell to a nothing, calling the guards to remove the stain from his floor before paying customers, savoring every second of it because he thinks he's the one in control. 200 merchants and shoppers watch a champion of the rings be swept out like spilled grain, hauled past the silk bolts and spice barrels while Pell narrates the humiliation for anyone still watching, and its contempt no gambler could ever spin into a wager. 9 marks scald up his forearm in the alley afterward, and Aldous Pell goes home, pleased with himself, never once suspecting he just tithed the boy he threw out. 35 of 100, and a new venue in his toolkit, off the circuit entirely, where the crowd came to trade rather than to root, and where a public fall lands differently than it does in front of gamblers who already expect one. 39 days to the trial now, and the number sits heavier every morning. Senna meets him at the loft and doesn't wince at the marks the way she used to. She's past that. Instead, she starts mapping every place in the capital where people still gather who think a struck name is beneath them. Markets, guild halls, temple steps, a whole geography of small contempts. It's a whole city of them, hers for the planning, if he's willing to spend himself across every corner of it. The path to the real brackets runs through the Duelists Guild, and the registrar, a pinched man named Merrick Hale, does not want to struck nobody anywhere near his rolls, let alone entered on them. He invents a fee, then a second fee when the first doesn't work, then a rule about lineage that he clearly wrote on the walk from his office to the desk. Corin can't out-argue a man being paid to say no, so he does the other thing instead. He provokes Hale into humiliating him loudly, in front of a hall full of waiting duelists who all stop to watch, until the registrar sneers that the boy has no name to enter and never will. The hall watches every second of it. 7 marks answer up his arm right there in front of them, and Corin thanks him for it, calmly, which unsettles Hale far more than any threat ever could have. 42 marks now, and still not on the guild rolls, which is the exact problem with paying in shame for a door that stays shut no matter how much you spend against it. 37 days left, and the arithmetic keeps getting less forgiving. Senna finds the workaround, because she always does. The Ascension trial takes court-recorded standing, not guild rank, which means Corin can bypass Hale entirely by building his record directly in the rings and in the magistrate's ledger instead. It's slower, and it costs more marks than the guild route would have, but it can't be locked by a bribed clerk with a grudge and a fee schedule, and Corin has learned by now to prefer roads that no bribe can close behind him. So he engineers something bigger, something that can't be walked back or laughed off by anyone watching. At the Fountain Square exhibition, before a 1,000-strong festival crowd packed shoulder to shoulder around the winner's circle, Corin wins his bracket cleanly, then kneels down in front of all of them and publicly begs Magistrate Ott's clerk to record the Vale name as struck, aloud, so every single person there hears exactly what he's lost. He turns his own victory into a humiliation with his own mouth, before anyone else can do it for him. 1,000 people watch a champion beg to be called nothing in front of the whole capital, and 8 marks scald up his throat for the first time, a new kind of pain in a new place. 50 of 100. Half his skin's allowance spent, and the marks have climbed past his collar now, up where no scarf can hide them. 38 days remain before the trial. He stands in the winner's circle, branded clear to the jaw, ranked at last into the true brackets among fighters who matter, and the crowd doesn't know whether to cheer or cross themselves. Some do both, uneasily, in the same breath. Senna finds him after, pushing through the press of bodies, and she says nothing about the marks. Not one word, not even a lingering glance. She just reties his collar higher than before, her fingers quick and sure, and that silence is its own kind of speech. Dorian Aldrich watched the Fountain Square stunt unfold from a balcony above the noise, and he's the one who finally strings the pattern together. He notices the black marks always bloom right after the boy is degraded, humiliated, shamed before a crowd, never after a win, never after applause. He's clever enough not to just wonder, he tests it. He plants a heckler in Corin's next bout, pays for the filthiest version of the veiled disgrace money can buy, and watches with open delight as fresh marks answer on Corin's arm within moments, right on cue. Dorian doesn't run to tell his father, not yet. A secret, he already understands, is only leverage for as long as you're the only one holding it. Senna turns ruthless in Corin's favor, colder and more calculating than she's ever let herself be. She learns which exhibitions draw the biggest galleries, the cruelest crowds hungriest for someone else's fall, and steers him into exactly those arenas, timing his engineered stumbles for the moment of peak witness when every eye is locked on him. She even plants questions in the stands herself, a shout about the struck name at just the right pause, a jeer timed to land, so the shame carries loud and the fuel it buys him runs rich and fast. It works, every time, precisely as she plans it. And it makes her a face the Aldrich watchers have started quietly writing down. An Aldrich informant reports to Dorian that a low-born duelist named Senna Rule keeps turning up wherever the marked boy performs, and always seems to know exactly which way the crowd is about to turn before it happens. Dorian smiles slowly, because now he has 2 threads to pull instead of 1. He can hurt the boy directly, openly, or hurt the woman who keeps making the boy stronger behind the scenes, and cruelty, given the choice, always prefers the softer target, the one nobody's watching to protect. The narrator notes, quietly, that the temperature in this story just dropped a few degrees, and it will not be coming back up. That night, the blank disc walks Corin into a counting room where an Aldrich steward named Prewitt sits hunched over ledgers, tallying the Vale tenant tithes by candlelight. Prewitt is a soft, round man with ink-stained cuffs and a nervous, wheezing laugh, and he doesn't recognize the nobody standing quietly at the door, so he grumbles the numbers aloud to himself, unguarded, the way lonely men do when they think no one's listening. Corin learns, piece by piece, that the squeeze on the tenants is deliberate policy. Farron wants the old Vale lands emptied of anyone who might still remember a Vale fondly, anyone who could tell the old stories. He pockets the fact the way he pockets everything now, as ammunition, cold and useful, not grief to carry. House Aldrich's first real answer to the marked boy isn't public, it's a knife in the dark. 2 hired men catch Corin alone in a tanner's alley after a bout, quiet and professional about it, meaning to end the nuisance somewhere no crowd can feed on the spectacle. This is the first time the stakes turn genuinely lethal, no longer just shame and spectacle, and Corin, ranked now and hardened by 50 days of pain, only barely fights the 2 men off, taking a shallow line across the forearm that tears open 3 of his own marks in the struggle. He leaves them groaning face down in the mud and walks away understanding the new rule of this game. They've decided he's worth killing, which, in its own dark way, means he's finally worth something. 53 of 100. The alley fight scraped only a few marks off the ledger, bought by the handful who watched a nobody get jumped in the dark and pitied him afterward. 34 days left, and the number feels thinner than it should. Senna cleans the cut along his jaw in silence first, then tells him flatly, if they'll pay coin for knives now, they'll pay worse later, and standing near him just got more expensive for them both. He offers, again, to cut her loose, to send her back to whatever life doesn't end in an alley. She threads the needle through his collar instead and tells him, again, to stop asking, her hands steadier than her voice. The near miss follows them into everything after. A wariness neither one puts down, a glance over the shoulder that becomes habit, a door checked twice before either of them sleeps. Bevan the grain hauler travels 3 hard days to the capital, dust still on his coat, to warn Corin that the tenants can't hold much longer. Pruitt's stewards have started evicting the oldest Vale families outright, dragging them into the road with whatever they can carry. An elderly weaver named Marta was put out with her loom for owing a single season's tithe, and there's no lord left in the valley to hear her case or stay the steward's hand. For the first time, the cost of Corin's slow climb wears a specific old woman's face, not an abstraction on a ledger. He gives Bevan every coin he's won in the ring, presses it into his hands until there's nothing left, and adds a promise he isn't sure he can keep. A ranked man can compel an answer where a beggar cannot, and he means to become one, whatever it costs him first. Corin needs bigger contempt than the streets can offer, and he finds it in an ugly, gilded place. The High Temple, where a preening almoner named Brother Call stands on the steps lecturing the poor on the dignity of accepting their station in life. Corin kneels among the beggars in full view of the doors and asks aloud for alms in the name of a struck house, his voice pitched to carry, forcing Call to either ignore him or denounce him before the whole gathering congregation. The almoner chooses denunciation, calling him a warning made flesh, a boy whose own family the gods themselves saw fit to let fall. The crowd murmurs and stares, some with pity, most with the particular hunger of people glad it isn't them. 10 marks answer the spectacle, and Corin bows his head like a penitent accepting judgment, spending his shame deliberately, methodically, in a house that has always known how to sell it. 63 of 100 now, and the marks have crept up the backs of both wrists where no sleeve, however long, can hide them anymore. 31 days left on the count that never stops running in his head. Senna runs the projection with him this time, laying the numbers out plainly between them, and neither one likes the answer it gives back. He's still finding fuel somewhere, still scraping together enough contempt to feed the count, but the biggest venues are used up already, spent and exhausted, and each new humiliation must be uglier than the last, just to top what the city has already watched him endure. They're climbing a staircase that steepens with every single step they take, the air thinner at each landing, and there are still noble houses out there, untouched, that haven't even noticed him yet. 30 days to the trial now, 64 marks of 100 already claimed, and the board never once leaves his mind, not waking, not sleeping. Corin stands alone in the loft, staring down at the black, spreading steadily over both forearms and pooling at the base of his throat, redoing a projection he already knows the shape of by heart, hoping the numbers will somehow bend. At his current rate of fall per fuel, the arithmetic is merciless. He runs out of skin before he runs out of enemies willing to shame him. He needs bigger humiliations for the same handful of marks, or fewer marks demanded for the same rise in rank, and both roads keep narrowing in front of him, the walls closing in a little more with every passing, restless night. Dorian arranges to face Corin himself in a ranked exhibition bout, all charm and gold and easy smiles for the crowd, and then spends the entire fight not fighting at all. He won't strike, won't taunt, won't offer the stands a single opening or a single reason to sneer at either of them. Just elegant, patient defense while the audience grows restless and then bored, the tension draining out of the arena minute by minute. Corin feels a cold drop low in his stomach as he realizes, mid-bout, that the heir has already figured it out, has already found the answer nobody else thought to look for. Deny the shame, and you deny the fuel that feeds him. When the bout is finally called a draw, the crowd unsatisfied and murmuring, Dorian leans in close and murmurs, almost gently, that he knows exactly what feeds the boy now, and that starving is such a quiet, patient way to die. That draw is the hinge of the whole middle turn, and Corin feels it swing before he understands why. Dorian carries the secret straight to Farron, quietly, without ceremony, and House Aldrich changes its posture overnight. No more public cruelty, no more heckles from the rail, no boots planted on the crest for show. Where Corin walks, rooms empty a beat too smoothly to be coincidence. Where he speaks, faces turn to the wall in practiced unison, as if some order had gone out while he slept. The great house simply stops witnessing him at all, and the change is more unsettling than any threat, because it is so disciplined, so total, so clearly decided somewhere above his sight. The supply he'd been mining for weeks is cut off at the source in a single stroke, and his marks stop rising while the day count keeps falling under him like sand. The starvation is worse than any beating, because there's nothing to bite, nothing to push against, nothing that even admits it's a fight. Corin enters an exhibition, and the noble box clears out with theatrical boredom, chairs scraping in unison like a rehearsed exit. He kneels to provoke a jeer and gets studied indifference instead, eyes sliding past him as if he were furniture. An Aldrich crier posts a genteel notice in the market square, declaring that acknowledging the struck boy is beneath the dignity of any house, turning naked contempt into a rule everyone can follow without ever raising a hand. He's surrounded by thousands in the packed arena and witnessed by no one among them, which for a boy who has learned to live on being seen is the same as being alone in a locked box with the door welded shut. The silence order reaches the rings soon enough, and Fenric Boyle, who once found Corin so funny, so profitable, so worth the risk, suddenly can't afford to book him at any price. The Aldrichs have let it be known, quietly and thoroughly, that any ringmaster who profits from the struck boy shares his standing and his debts, and Fenric loves his ledger far too much to die for a novelty act. He tells Corin the door's closed, not unkindly, almost gently, and even the gold tooth in his smile looks apologetic in the lamplight. Corin loses the venue he built his whole engine on, the one stage where marks could still be earned, honestly, and the disposable little man who once leashed him and pocketed his cut is now just another face in the crowd that won't meet his eyes. Even Kessa, who despised him honestly and said so to his face, is warned off in turn, and it turns out honest contempt is a thing the Aldrichs can buy too, the way they buy everything else. She passes him in the pen and, for the first time since he arrived, says nothing at all, her jaw tight, her eyes fixed somewhere past his shoulder, because a public sneer at the marked boy is now a public risk to her hard-won rank among the others. Corin realizes, watching her walk past in that new and terrible silence, that this quiet is worse than her old hatred precisely because it recruits people who don't even hate him, who might under other circumstances have simply ignored him out of indifference. He's not being punished anymore in any way he can name or answer. He's being erased instead, one averted face at a time, one small, careful silence after another. 22 days remain to the trial, 64 marks banked, and the second number hasn't moved in over a week despite everything he's tried. Corin sits alone in an empty ring after a bout that drew a paid, silent crowd instructed not to react, not to cheer, not even to boo, and feels the whole class idle around him like a stalled heart that won't restart. Senna finds him there in the dust and says the obvious cruel truth out loud, because someone has to. They don't have to beat him now. They only have to ignore him steadily until the clock runs out on its own. He's ranked high enough to be a nuisance worth silencing, and not high enough to compel anyone to answer him, and the narrow gap between those two positions is exactly where they mean to leave him stranded until the trial arrives. So Corin starts trying to force witness where none is freely offered, and each attempt grows uglier, more desperate, and pays steadily less than the last. He climbs a fountain in the market square to shout his own disgrace over the crowd, and the market pointedly buys turnips instead, refusing even the courtesy of a glance. 3 marks for a stunt that a month ago would have easily earned him 20. He interrupts a noble procession to kneel in the middle of the road, and the procession simply routs around him like he's a puddle left by last night's rain. No more remarkable than that. 2 marks and a bruise for his trouble. The crowds have learned, quickly and thoroughly, to look away, and looking away, he discovers, costs them absolutely nothing at all. The narrator lays out the vise plainly, because Corin lives inside it now, and the arithmetic has teeth. When witness is denied, the class scrapes value only from whoever's eyes accidentally land on him, so he has to manufacture accidents. A spilled cart, a blocked gate, a scene loud enough that some fraction of a crowd can't help but see. Every accident costs more to stage and returns fewer marks, and the ones he does earn come from strangers, not enemies, which somehow feels worse, thinner, less like victory than like begging dressed up as theater. He plans a bigger one anyway, because smaller ones have stopped paying at all, and standing still is its own kind of loss now. He's spending himself for pennies, and the 60-day clock doesn't care how tired the arithmetic makes him, doesn't slow, doesn't forgive a bad week. He tries a bigger accident, tipping a dyer's cart across the bridge gate at Market Rush so 100 people have to see the struck boy blamed and berated for it. It works, barely. The dyer, a shrill woman named Pip, curses him up and down while the bridge crowd gawks, and for one stretched-out minute the whole crossing is nothing but eyes on him. And 6 marks answer, thin payment for a public bruising and a ruined afternoon. But an Aldrich watcher notes the trick, watching the way it built, the way it paid, and by dusk there's a new instruction posted on the crier's boards. Any scene the marked boy causes is to be cleared without comment, no blame spoken aloud, no gawking allowed to linger. They're closing even the accidents now, methodically, one loophole at a time, and Corin feels the walls come in another foot. 70 of 100, 30 of skin left, and the marks have crept onto the base of his throat above any collar he might wear to hide them. 19 days remain, fewer than the fingers of both hands and half again, and the map of what's left keeps shrinking. Senna re-inks the day count on the last clear stripe of his forearm and asks, carefully, whether he's counted how few big falls he has left before he's out of room to spend, out of skin to write on. He has. He just hasn't said it aloud, because saying it makes the arithmetic real in a way silence lets him postpone a little longer. The narrator lets the number sit unadorned, without comfort, 70 marks, 19 days, and the surest venues all closed against him now, one by one, like doors shutting down a long hall. Not every noble loves the silence, and cracks like that are rare enough to matter. A minor baroness named Adeline Frey, old and acid and privately contemptuous of the Aldrichs for dictating whom she may despise, decides to insult the boy in public purely to spite Farron, because pride, in the end, answers to no one's decree. She corners Corin at a chandlery and delivers a masterclass of aristocratic cruelty in front of a full shop, calling the Vale line a cautionary tale for people who mistake blood for spine, each word aimed to wound and, unwittingly, to feed him. 8 marks answer, and it's the best fuel he's had in a week, bought, absurdly, from a noble rebelling against being told not to feed him, spite doing the work kindness couldn't, proof that command has limits even here. 78 of 100, and a discovery worth more than the marks themselves, worth turning over and over to see what it might become. The silence only holds while Farron's word does, and pride like Adeline's is a crack running through it, thin but real. 16 days remain. Senna and Corin realize the counter isn't perfect. It depends on hundreds of proud people all obeying one man, and proud people are famously terrible at obedience when their vanity is on the line, when spite pulls harder than fear does. It's not enough to win on, not yet, nowhere close, but it's the first evidence that a room ordered not to look is a room that can still, somehow, be made to look. They file it away carefully, turning the idea over like a found key, and the finale will remember it. Dorian, who misses nothing, hears that old Adeline Frey mouthed off to the marked boy and moves fast to seal the leak before it spreads any further, before other proud names get ideas of their own. He can't very well silence a baroness outright, not without a cost he isn't willing to pay, so he does something colder. He has her mockery quietly praised at court, reframing her insult as loyal contempt rather than defiance, until it stops being rebellion and hardens into doctrine everyone can repeat without thinking twice. Now even the nobles who break ranks feed Corin only in ways the Aldrichs can absorb and redirect, folding rebellion back into the machine. The heir is learning the mechanic as fast as Corin is, watching, adjusting, and he has far more hands to close doors with. 15 days out, Corin can't sleep, and neither can Senna in the bunk below. They talk in the dark like two people counting the same short supply, turning the same coins over and over to see if they've somehow multiplied. They haven't. She's mapped every venue left in the capital, every fighting yard, every showground, every hall with a crowd big enough to matter, and there aren't enough big falls left to close the gap before the trial. Not at the rate, the silence is bleeding him dry, quietly, fight by unrecorded fight. He asks the question he's avoided all week, the one he's circled without saying outright. Is there any single act loud enough, public enough, undeniable enough that it can't be silenced the way everything else has been? She goes quiet, and the quiet stretches longer than either of them expects. She already knows the answer, and she hates it, hates that it exists, hates more that she's the one who found it first. The scene ends on that unsaid thing, hanging between the loft floor and the ceiling, neither of them willing to be the one who speaks it into the room. Next morning she says it, the way she works a lock, patient, exact, no wasted motion, as if saying it carefully might make it hurt less. Neither of them likes the answer once it's out in the open air. One crowd can't look away, and one witness the law itself forces the room to record, whether the great houses want it recorded or not, a strike delivered in the magistrate's own court, before Magistrate Ott, becomes testimony the instant it happens, sealed into the record by the same rules the nobles use to protect themselves. But to land as the humiliation the class truly needs, to mean what it must mean, it can't be delivered by just anyone. It has to be someone ranked beneath him, striking him before the whole court, a low-born hand crossing a noble face in front of witnesses who cannot pretend they didn't see it. The only such person near him with anything left to lose is her. She says it before he can, flat and certain, the decision already made in her own mind long before she brought it to him. She'll be the one to hit him. For once, Corin balks, and balks hard. A low-born who strikes a noble in open court gets branded a noble beater for life, a mark that never washes out, barred from every ring, flagged in every ledger, watched by every guard who ever hears the word, ruined past any healing he could offer her later. She already knows all of this. She did the math first, longer and more carefully than he has, because she's the one who'll carry it. He says, plainly, that he won't spend her to buy his rank, won't let her name be the coin he pays with. She asks, coldly, without blinking, what he thinks the tenants on the road are being spent for right now, today, while they argue in comfort. He has no answer to that, and the silence that follows is its own kind of answer, heavier than anything he could have said. The blank disc buys Corin one more room to study before anything is risked. The antechamber of Magistrate Ott, an old jurist with a granite face and a reputation for hating the great houses precisely because they treat the law as furniture, something to be rearranged whenever it's inconvenient. Corin doesn't reveal himself. He simply listens, patient in the shadow of the doorway, as Ott dresses down an Aldrich factor for treating a summons like a suggestion rather than a command. From it, he learns what he needed to know. Ott can't be bought, won't be rushed, and answers to no house, but must, by the oldest rule of his office, record exactly what happens in his court, whatever it is. Even a lowborn's fist. Even a struck man's shame, written down and sealed where no one can later pretend it didn't happen. It's a thin edge to build a plan on. But Corin has learned, these past weeks, to cut with thin edges when nothing wider is offered to him. Here the narrator plants a seed the finale will harvest, quietly, without pointing at it, without letting Corin himself see its shape yet. In the empty hours he can't spend fighting, hours that used to be wasted on worry, he starts something strange and slow. He begins collecting witnesses of a different kind entirely, feeding the tenants' own accounts of the evictions into Ott's clerks, one name at a time, one testimony at a time, into the permanent court record where nothing sealed there can simply vanish. He tells himself it's only to build the charge he'll bring later, if he ever ranks high enough for anyone to listen. He doesn't yet see what he's actually doing, that he's teaching an entire city to remember him on purpose, name by patient name, and that this slow accumulation, not any single dramatic fall, not any one blow struck in anger, is what will finally beat the silence for good. Bevan brings Marta the weaver to the clerk's hall to speak her eviction into the record, the first tenant to give her account in her own voice rather than through Corin's summary of it. She is small, straight-backed, quietly furious in a way that reminds Corin uncomfortably of himself on his worst mornings. She tells the clerk about the loom that took her mother 11 years to pay off, about the road that will run straight through her floorboards, about the season's tithe she'd already scraped together before the notice came. She does not ask for pity, not once, not even when her voice catches on the word home. Corin watches the clerk's pen move line by line and feels something turn over in his chest that he can't yet name, something between shame and resolve. When she finishes, he tells her plainly that the record is permanent now, that no house, however great, can strike it or soften it after the fact. She looks at him for a long moment, weighing that, and says that then it's the first thing she's ever owned outright that they can't take from her. 15 days remain before the trial, 78 marks sit against his name, and the ascension bracket window closes in 3 days, whether he is ready or not. To enter it all, a challenger needs a court-recorded standing above a baseline. He sits just one recorded humiliation short of, thanks entirely to the long silence that stalled his climb while Farron's people worked quietly against him. There is exactly one humiliation left in the world worth buying at that price, and its cost is the whole shape of Senna's life afterward, not just tonight. He climbs the stairs to her loft anyway, turns the price over one more time on the landing, and finally says it to her plainly instead of dancing around it as he has for weeks. If she is still willing, he needs her to strike him in Magistrate Ott's court, and he needs the blow to look real, because under the court's law it will have to be. Senna doesn't make a speech out of it. She was never going to, and this was never going to be that kind of choice for her. She asks him only 2 questions, flat and practical. Will it actually rank him? And will it let him compel Farron to answer in open court? And when he answers yes to both without flinching, she simply says all right, as if he'd asked her to fetch water. Then she tells him, almost gently, that she decided this weeks ago, long before he worked up the nerve to ask, and that she was only ever waiting for him to stop pretending he could still spare her from it. Last, she offers the one soft thing in the whole grim exchange, said so quietly he almost misses it. A struck name still has to eat somehow, and she'd rather it eat well than starve nobly. Sensing the boy finally cornered, Dorian tightens the screws with an easy, satisfied smile that never reaches his eyes. He has Prewitt's stewards accelerate the evictions on Corin's remaining tenants and makes certain word of it reaches Corin within the hour, betting that a desperate, cornered man makes public scenes, and that a public scene is precisely the kind of thing House Aldrich can now simply decline to witness or acknowledge. He also lets slip, through a paid mouth positioned near Senna, that House Aldrich would happily consider the low-born duelist's entire career forfeit at the very first convenient excuse. It arrives dressed as idle gossip, but it's a warning, and everyone involved knows it. Senna hears it exactly as it was meant to land, turns the words over once in her mind, and doesn't blink. At the next session in Magistrate Ott's court, Corin brings his tenant charge forward in person, standing where a ranked challenger stands to answer for it, with Senna registered formally as witness beside him. When Ott asks, as the law requires him to ask, who will speak to the struck man's character, Senna steps forward without hesitation, calls him a coward who let his own people rot while he played at rings and titles, and strikes him open-handed across the face, hard, in front of the full assembled court. The clerks' pens move because the law compels them to move whether they wish to or not, and the blow and every word of it are entered into the record, verbatim and permanent. 20 marks flare up Corin's throat and along his jaw in one searing line of heat, and he does not wipe away the blood that follows it, because the record has to show exactly what happened here. 98 marks out of a possible 100, the qualifying baseline cleared in a single recorded stroke, the count landing far higher than either of them had dared to plan or even hope for. Ott, granite-faced and giving nothing away, notes the new standing without a word of comment and formally enters Corin into the ascension brackets before the session closes. Senna is escorted out already branded for it, her name written into every ring's black ledger before she has even reached the door at the back of the hall. She doesn't look back at him once, not out of coldness, but because looking back would make Corin do something rash, something that would cost him marks he suddenly, terribly, cannot afford to spare. The narrator refuses to rush past what she just did, and makes the reader sit in the cost of it. By nightfall, Senna is barred from every duel ring in the capital, her winnings frozen mid-ledger, her lodging revoked by a landlord who suddenly remembers a rule he never once enforced. Aldrich criers see to it that the story outruns her, the noble beater who assaulted a gentleman before the sitting magistrate, unfit now for any honest hall in the city. She takes a bunk in the tanner's loft below Corin's without complaint, tells him flatly that the brand was always the plan, and reties his collar higher over the fresh marks before he can even ask her to. Nothing about it is played for a laugh. The emotion is simply allowed to sit there, unresolved, exactly as heavy as it actually is. 12 days remain before the Ascension trial, and Corin sits up through the night with the arithmetic finally inverted against him. He has room left for 2 more marks, no more, and an entire trial still ahead of him before he can ever force Farron to answer for anything. Every fall from here spends skin he may desperately need at the very end, and he still doesn't know what actually waits for him at the 100th mark, only that it's coming. He had built his whole plan on the comfort of always having more room to give. Now the ceiling sits close enough to touch, black and absolute across the backs of his hands. Whatever answer the 100th mark holds, he understands he will meet it inside the trial itself, or he will not get to meet it at all. Dorian intercepts Corin on the courthouse steps, and for the first time the gold in his voice carries a real edge of unease beneath it. He tells Corin plainly that his father already knows the boy will be branded near his limit by the time the trial arrives, and has prepared the one weapon a witness-eater like Corin cannot survive. When Corin asks what that weapon is, Dorian only says, nothing. My father will simply have the entire hall look away, and a man who needs to be watched will win his argument to an empty room full of silence. He clearly means it as a killing blow, delivered almost gently, and it very nearly lands as one. Corin walks back to the loft and lays Dorian's threat flat on the table for Senna, and together they see the whole shape of it at once. Farron will have to answer the charge in person, because the trial itself compels him to, but he will answer it into a silence so total and so ordered that the class starves of witnesses at the exact moment it needs them most. Every fall Corin engineered from the start assumed a crowd that physically couldn't help but watch him go down. Farron's counter is a crowd that has been ordered, on pain of ruin, not to watch at all. It's the perfect inversion of Corin's whole mechanic, built by someone who studied it closely, and Corin now has 12 days to find the one thing that beats it. Senna is the one who almost catches it first. She points out, almost offhand, that Corin has been quietly stuffing the court record with tenant testimony for weeks now, and that half the Low City already knows his story, not because they watched him fall in some ring, but because they chose, on their own, to remember it. Corin waves the observation off without much thought. That's a legal charge sitting in a ledger somewhere, he says, not a weapon against silence in a hall. The narrator lets the misdirection stand exactly as spoken, because Corin genuinely doesn't understand yet what he's already built without meaning to, and the story earns far more by letting him discover it at the worst possible second than by explaining it now. The Ascension trial isn't a single fight. It's a ladder of ranked bouts stretched over several days in the magistrate's great hall, and only the final rung earns the right to compel a house to answer publicly. Corin's first trial opponent turns out to be Sir Halvo again, the boot-on-the-crest cousin, now furious and hungry for a clean win that might erase the memory of last time. This time, Corin doesn't kneel for him. He can't spare the marks it would cost, and instead simply outfights him, cold and efficient and utterly without theater, and wins standing fully upright. The crowd, packed and still neutral, and not yet bound under Farron's coming silence order, watches a badly struck man flatly refuse to fall, and something in the room quietly shifts. Corin takes exactly one mark in that first bout, and not the way he used to. Halvo, losing badly and unable to accept it, screams the old slander about the veil line to the whole hall, loud enough that it climbs to the rafters, and a fraction of the crowd flinches in secondhand shame on Corin's behalf. The class, scraping against the ceiling he built for it, finds 99. It is the last mark he can afford, and he spent it in the very first round of the day, which terrifies him far more than any opponent standing across the sand from him. 10 days remain to the final session. 99 marks sit banked against him, and a limit no living person has ever crossed waits one single mark away, patient and unmarked on any wall. That night, Corin doesn't sleep, because one more humiliation anywhere in the next 10 days pushes him to 100, and he still doesn't know whether 100 is a weapon or a grave waiting to close over him. He has to fight the rest of the trial without being shamed even once, which for a man whose entire class runs on shame is like crossing a desert forbidden to sweat, forbidden even to feel the thirst. Senna sees it instantly, turning it over out loud until the shape of it is unavoidable. He must win every remaining bout with total dignity, giving no crowd, no judge, no rival, a single opening to pity him or jeer. The very thing he spent 60 patient days courting, cultivating, and hoarding is now the thing that could kill him mid-trial if it slips its leash for even a moment. His second trial opponent is a genuine monster, Sir Gallia Voss, an iron-ranked knight with a warhammer and no interest whatsoever in politics, who simply intends to end him quickly and cleanly. This is the first trial bout Corin nearly loses outright. Gallia caves his guard in 2 blows, cracks 2 of his ribs with a third, and puts him flat on the floor in front of the entire hall. He wins only by baiting her into a reckless overcommit and dropping her with a strike he can barely lift his own arm to throw, every fiber of it screaming, and he forces himself upright fast, faster than the pain wants to allow, so the fall reads to the crowd as tactics chosen on purpose, not shame suffered by accident. He pays for that win in his own bone, in breath he can't quite take, and the cost is plain for anyone watching closely. The trial is starting to take his body now, not just his skin and his pride. The ribs are the entire point of that bout, because Corin got knocked flat before thousands of watching eyes and did not take a mark for it, because he refused, with everything he had left in him, to feel humiliated by the fall. He's discovered, almost by accident, that he can starve his own class by sheer choice, holding the line at 99 through raw will alone, and it costs him something new every single round he does it. Senna binds his ribs tight, hands steady even when her voice isn't, and says the cruel irony aloud so neither of them can pretend not to have heard it. The discipline now keeping him alive is the exact opposite of the discipline that got him this far in the first place. He has to be 2 contradictory men in one battered body, holding both at once, and the trial still has 8 rungs left to climb. Dorian, seated at his father's shoulder as always, watches Corin win on cracked ribs and stops smiling for the first time in this trial. He'd assumed the boy would burn out somewhere along the way, chasing witnesses and applause until the fire ran out. He hadn't planned for a Corin who simply outfights the bracket rung by rung while refusing, flatly, to break in front of anyone. Farron, unbothered as ever, leans over and tells his son that skill alone gets the boy to the final rung, and silence is what takes the whole thing away from him again, and that a sharper knife still can't cut a room that refuses to even look at it. Dorian nods slowly at that, But the unease that first climbed into him on the courthouse steps hasn't left, because he was the one who first spotted the marks scored against Corin, and he knows better than almost anyone in that hall exactly how close to full they already are. House Aldrich hedges anyway, because Farron never gambles on one plan alone. Between rungs, a serving boy brings Corin a cup of watered wine, ordinary as any other served that day, and Senna knocks it from his hand a breath before it reaches his lips, having watched the boy's hands shake wrong when steadier hands should have known better. The cup hisses where it hits the stone, a thin curl of vapor rising off the spreading puddle, and for a moment nobody in the corridor says anything at all. Someone wanted the struck champion to simply not wake for his next bout, quietly, without a mark or a blade or a witness who could name a name. It's the second lethal near miss in as many weeks, and it tells them the Aldrichs aren't certain the silence will hold on its own, which is, oddly, the most hopeful thing Corin's heard in weeks, because a man that confident doesn't need poison. 8 days to the final session, 99 marks, 1 of skin left, 2 ribs cracked, and 1 poisoning survived. Senna keeps the tally now because Corin's hands shake too badly some mornings to hold the ink steady himself. Corin's whole throat and both arms and hands are black now, the marks crawling toward his knuckles and his jaw and creeping along his collarbone like something that has decided to keep going, whether he wills it or not, and Senna re-inks the day count on the last clear patch of skin she can find, working carefully around a bruise that hasn't finished turning colors. She asks him quietly what he'll do if he hits 100 mid-trial, in front of the hall, in front of everyone who's come to watch, and he admits he doesn't know, turning the question over like a stone with no smooth side, and that not knowing is the only thing left that scares him. More than Dorian, more than the poison, more than the ledger itself. His third trial opponent is a slippery duelist named Sable Rain, who's studied the marked boy for days and fights dirty on purpose, trying to shame him into a mark and over the edge mid-bout where the whole hall can watch him fall. Sable spits, mocks the Vale name loud enough for the front rows to hear, stages a grab meant to make Corin look mauled and desperate in front of the gallery. Every trick in the book and a few outside it, all designed to trip the class rules Corin has sworn to keep. Corin wins by refusing to be humiliated by any of it, treating the filth like weather passing through, letting the insults land and slide off without so much as a flinch, and puts Sable down clean without letting a single mark answer for it. It's the hardest bout he's fought since the trials began, and not one blow of it was physical. The real fight happened entirely behind his teeth. Word of the struck boy fighting up the ascension ladder reaches the old Vale lands within days, carried by drovers and market gossip faster than any formal notice could travel, and something the Aldrichs didn't plan for happens. The tenants come to the capital. Bevan, Marta, with her looms slung on her back. Pruitt's evicted families still carrying what little they saved from the road. Dozens of them, then hundreds, filling the cheap galleries of the magistrate's hall to watch the man who put their names into the permanent record when no one else would. They aren't nobles, and they can't be ordered to look away, can't be fined or shamed out of a public gallery the way a lesser house might be, and Farron's clerks note the crowd with the first flicker of a frown crossing faces that are usually so carefully blank. Corin sees Marta's face in the gallery, worn and unguarded and fixed on him, and understands, dimly, that he built this and doesn't yet know into what. 6 days to the final session, and the cheap galleries fill a little more each round as more tenant families make the long walk in from the old lands, sleeping rough near the hall gates rather than miss a bout. Dorian notices the swelling crowd of nobodies pressing against the rails and orders the gallery admissions capped, quietly, through a clerk rather than his own voice. Then realizes he can't legally bar witnesses from an open court without conceding out loud that they're witnesses who matter. It's the second crack in the silence he's tried to hold around this whole affair, and this time Corin sees it too, sees it plainly across the width of the hall. Farron can command the nobles with a look or a letter, but the low city was never his to command and never will be. Corin still thinks it's only a comfort, a warm thing to hold on to at night, not a weapon he could ever actually use, and lets himself keep the blind spot 1 round longer. Pruitt, the steward, comes to the loft in the dark, ink-stained and soft-handed, a man built for ledgers and not for courage, and tonight he is visibly terrified. He carries a satchel that seems too heavy for him, clutched against his chest like it might be taken before he means to give it up. He has watched the evicted tenants fill a courtroom day after day, watched their faces harden into something he can't unsee, and he can no longer sleep in the great house knowing what his own hand has recorded. He wants his name on the right side of the record before the end comes, whichever way it comes. He hands Corin the full accounting of the Aldrich squeeze. Every doubled tithe entered twice under 2 different dates. Every forged arrears notice backdated to manufacture a debt that never existed. All of it signed, unmistakably, in Farron's own hand. It is the charge made unanswerable, the proof no clever rhetoric can dissolve. And it costs Pruitt everything he ever had with the great house, his position, his pension, his place at their table, which is precisely why Corin trusts it. A man does not burn his whole life down for a lie. The semifinal rung pits Corin against Dorian Aldrich himself, and this time the heir actually fights. All that golden training finally turned towards something meant to kill rather than merely to impress. It is a long, brutal, grinding bout, blow answering blow past the point where either man's arms should still lift. And Dorian is, in every technical sense, the better trained fighter. Cleaner footwork, better form, years of tutors behind every motion. But he is fighting a man who has been paid in pain for 2 straight months and has long since stopped treating pain as a deterrent worth listening to. Corin takes a wound across his side that will scar him for the rest of his life, and he gives it back with interest, blow for blow, until the balance tips. When Dorian finally goes down, he does not beg, and that is the first thing Corin has ever found himself respecting in the man. Corin wins the right to stand at the final rung. Across the hall, Farron Aldrich rises slowly from his seat, because he understands, at last, that it is now his turn to answer. The narrator marks the miracle quietly, almost in passing, the way the story marks its truest turns. Corin fought the heir of House Aldrich, took a scar he will carry forever, won the bout outright, and gained no mark for it, because Dorian met him as an equal, and there is no shame in losing a hard-fought contest to a man you are willing to call worthy. Dorian, still on the ground, bruised and breathing hard, tells Corin plainly that he was wrong about him, and it isn't offered as kindness or as a loser's grace. It's offered as simple accuracy, a correction to the record. Corin now stands at 99 marks, one single mark from the 100 that ends everything, and he has held that line through 5 brutal rungs of a trial explicitly built to push him over it. Only 2 days remain before the final session convenes, and Farron Aldrich will be waiting there, in the answering box, when it does. Senna comes to find him in the holding room and finally says the thing they have both spent weeks carefully avoiding. He is going to hit 100 marks in that hall, one way or another, sooner or later, and neither of them has any real idea what that limit actually does to a man when it arrives. She asks him for a promise, her voice steady even though her hands aren't, that if the limit turns out to be a death, he will compel Farron's answer first, before anything else, so that the tenants are protected regardless of what happens to him afterward. He promises her, because it is the only promise that makes the last 2 months of blood and bruises mean anything at all. She retees his collar one final time, her fingers careful over a throat gone almost entirely black from strain and impact, and in that small, quiet, deliberate act, it becomes the closest either of them has come yet to saying the other thing neither of them has dared to name aloud. Farron Aldrich does not bother preparing a defense against the tenant charge, because he has no intention of losing the argument on its merits. His plan is to make the merits irrelevant entirely, to remove the ground the argument would even stand on. Instead, he circulates a private instruction, quiet and precise, to every noble house in attendance, every clerk who will hold a pen that day, every ranked observer with standing to matter in that hall. When the struck boy speaks, look away, record nothing beyond the barest procedural minimum, and grant him no witness at all. He intends to turn the finale into the one condition Corin cannot fight his way through, a full, crowded room that simply refuses to see him, no matter how loudly or how truly he speaks. The narrator notes it plainly, without embellishment, because none is needed. This is the strongest counter in the entire story, aimed with surgical precision at the exact center of everything Corin is. One line in Farron's instruction will cost him everything, and he writes it without a second thought, the way a man signs a familiar order he has signed 100 times before. The line reads, "The order binds those withstanding." Nothing more, nothing qualified, because in Farron's mind, those are the only people an archduke ever bothers to command, the seated, the ranked, the ones whose names already carry weight in a ledger somewhere. The tenants filling the cheap galleries go unnamed in his draft, unmentioned, invisible, since in Farron's whole life it has never once mattered where a weaver's eyes happen to fall, or who is sitting close enough to see. Dorian reads the draft over his father's shoulder, and for one breath he almost speaks. He remembers the swelling crowd of nobodies who have been filling those cheap seats for weeks now, remembers counting them without meaning to. He opens his mouth, and then he says nothing, because contradicting his father has never once ended well. Not for Dorian, not for anyone who has tried it before him. That silence, small and private and utterly unremarked, is the hinge the whole finale will turn on. 2 days left, 99 marks already spent. Corin does not use the time to train. Instead, he goes back to Ott's clerks, bent over the record books, adding the last of the tenant names, one by one, still not seeing the weapon he is quietly assembling in his own hands. In the evenings, he walks to the gallery bunks and visits Marta, and she tells him plainly that she didn't come all this way to watch him win. She came because he was the first Lord's son who ever wrote her name down as if it mattered, as if a tenant's name deserved ink the same as anyone's. It lands on him strangely, half like a gift and half like a weight, and he can't yet tell which one it truly is. He walks back to the loft afterward, turning her words over and over, 1 mark short of 100, 2 days from a hall that will not so much as look at him, carrying her sentence like a stone he hasn't decided whether to set down. The final session opens in the magistrate's great hall, packed to the rafters with bodies and noise, and the particular hush that comes before something is about to be decided. Ott sits the high seat, composed and watchful. Farron Aldrich waits in the answering box, unhurried, certain. Corin enters ranked, marked to 99, the blank crest closed tight in his fist like the last coin he has to spend. And the moment he steps forward, the entire noble half of the hall turns its face to the wall, all at once, as if choreographed, as if rehearsed. Hundreds of the Empire's most powerful people, in perfect coordinated silence, simply refuse to witness him. The class idles like a stopped heart in his chest, no fuel coming, no acknowledgement offered, and Corin feels his whole careful strategy die right there on the threshold before he has spoken a single word of it. Corin brings the tenant charge anyway, because it is the only reason he is still standing in that hall at all. He lays it out piece by piece, the deliberate evictions, the doubled tithes stacked year over year, Pruitt's signed ledgers laid open on the record, Marta's account of the road and what it cost her, the slow emptying of the Vale lands down to bare houses. All of it true, all of it entered formally into Ott's record for anyone to read. And the noble hall says nothing, sees nothing, grants nothing in return. The words land in the record as ink alone and in the class as 0. No weight, no charge, no motion. Farron doesn't even bother to rebut a single point. He simply lets the silence do the work for him, because you cannot shame a man in front of people who have already agreed not to look at him. When Ott finally compels an answer, Farron rises unhurried and delivers the cruelest reply available to him. He agrees to every fact and denies every meaning behind it. Yes, the tithes rose, he admits it plainly. Yes, the families left their homes, he admits that too. And no, none of it matters, he says, because a struck name has no standing to be wronged in any court that counts, and there are no witnesses willing to say otherwise. He turns to the silent hall and sharpens the very line he first spoke on the first day of all this. A name is only what witnesses agree to call you, and this room, every seated soul in it, has agreed to call you nothing at all. For one long, suffocating moment, it lands as the killing blow it was built to be. Corin stands alone in the center of the hall with 99 marks and no fuel left to draw on, watching 60 days of careful work collapse in front of him. The nobles will not look, the class cannot feed, the charge is technically recorded and practically buried under silence. The tenants crowded into the cheap gallery can only watch him lose, the way they have watched everything else be taken from them. He has done everything the rule allowed him to do, followed every letter of it, and the rule turns out to have a ceiling that Farron found first and built around him on purpose. The failure is real and total, and it is held there for one long, unbearable beat, because the turn to come only counts if this fall was genuine. Corin's eyes rise to the gallery, to Marta, to Bevan, to Pruitt, to the hundreds of tenants who came not because Farron ordered it, but because they chose, on their own 2 feet, to remember. They are witnesses, and no instruction of Farron's binds them, because they were never his to command, not for a single day of this. In that instant, Corin finally understands what Senna half saw weeks ago, back when it still looked like foolishness. He didn't just survive being watched. He spent 2 long months quietly teaching a whole city to witness him on purpose, mark by mark, humiliation by humiliation, until watching became a habit no order could break. He turns his back on the silent nobles, on the box that once held his name for ransom, and speaks instead to the people who chose him freely, and the starving class, who have had almost nothing handed to them, finds one last thread to hold. Corin does the last, hardest humiliation on purpose, and he does it before the only crowd left that will still see him honestly. He kneels, champion of the trial, standing on its final rung, closer to the top than any Vale in memory, before the tenants, and confesses aloud, plainly, without softening a word. He let Marta be put on the road while he chased rings and marks, Senna carries a brand for life so that he could stand here today. The Vale name fell because he wasn't strong enough, quickly enough, to hold it together. The tenants don't look away. They can't. And more than that, they won't. Because remembering him, all of him, is the one dignity that hasn't yet been taken from them. The last shred of shame lands and settles into the dirt with him. The 100th mark burns black onto the back of his hand, deeper than the 99 before it. For one long heartbeat, nothing happens at all, the whole hall holding its breath together. At 100 marks, the class stops needing witnesses and starts making them, all at once, without asking anyone's permission. Everyone within sight of Corin Vale, tenants, clerks, every noble who turned deliberately to face the wall, is seized bodily and compelled to witness him, to remember him, permanently, entirely against their will, whatever they wanted instead. Heads that were ordered away are wrenched back by nothing visible. Eyes that refused him are forced wide open. The whole hall, Farron included, is made to see the struck man standing there and made unable, from this moment forward, ever to forget him. Farron's one perfect weapon, ordered silence, the tool he trusted above all others, shatters in his hand. Silence needs people who are still allowed to look away, and no one left in this room is allowed anything anymore, least of all that. The cost is not softened, not for him and not for anyone watching. From this second forward, Corin can never be unwitnessed again for the rest of his life. Every private hour, every future weakness, every humiliation he ever wanted quietly buried, all of it visible to everyone, forever, including the very ones he most wanted gone from his life. The kneel in the dirt, the beggar's plea, the blow from Senna's own hand, all of it laid open permanently to any eye that happens to land on him, with no curtain left to draw. He beat the man who tried to erase his name by making himself impossible to erase by anyone, ever again, and the price of that victory is that he will never again be anything but seen in every room for the rest of his days. He knew it at the last mark, before it fell, and he did it anyway, without flinching. Farron Aldrich stands in the answering box, compelled now to witness the boy he once called nothing, his own contemptuous words turned inside out before a hall that can no longer agree on anything except the plain truth in front of it. The charge that was once only ink and careful silence is now witnessed by every soul present, forced and permanent, unable to be filed away or quietly forgotten, and Magistrate Ott, who never once needed compelling to hate a great house, enters the finding with grim, unhurried satisfaction. Farron's standing to bury the Vale name is gone, spent, over. A name witnessed by a whole hall against its will is no longer his to strike from any record. For the first time in the story, the Archduke has nothing to say, nothing at all, because saying is a thing done to people who can still look away, and he can no longer count himself among them. Corin Vale wins the Ascension trial and claims the Empire's top rank, in a hall that was ordered from the very first day not to look at him and now cannot look away, whatever it once wished. Ott confirms the rank aloud, confirms the charge that rides beside it, and confirms the right that follows from both. House Aldrich will answer, in full and in public, for what it did to the Vale lands and to every person who worked them. The tenants in the gallery don't cheer so much as exhale all at once, 60 days and a lifetime of quiet arithmetic finally landing on the right side of the ledger after years of landing on the wrong one. Marta's name, and every other name Corin fed patiently into the record, is now witnessed by an empire built to forget such names, and cannot forget this one. Senna Rule stands at the edge of the hall, still branded, still barred from every ring she once fought in, and now witnessed forever beside him, which means the empire must remember exactly why she struck him, and exactly what that single blow bought for everyone who came after her. It doesn't lift her brand. That cost was made permanent the day she paid it, and no rank reverses it. But it changes what the brand means, turning it from a lowborn's crime into the blow that qualified a champion, remembered now by everyone who worked so hard to forget it, and can't anymore. She meets his eyes across the crowded hall, and neither of them says the soft thing, because after all this, they don't have to. Everyone watching will remember this moment too, and carry it forward. Corin walks the long floor to the answering box, where Farron stands compelled and fully witnessed at last, and he doesn't gloat, because gloating is for men who still need the crowd's permission to feel it. He simply reminds the Archduke, quietly, almost gently, what he told him on the very first day, and asked him to remember, a name is only what witnesses agree to call you, nothing more and nothing less. And now the whole empire is agreeing at once, loudly, and none of them chose to, and none of them can take it back. Farron, who spent an entire lifetime owning every mouth that could ever answer back to him, is answered by all of them at once and forever, without appeal. It is the coldest possible victory, entirely without heat. The register stays grim through all of it. No one in that hall laughs. Dorian Aldrich, who first saw the marks laid into the ledgers and first understood the rule hiding beneath them, is compelled now to witness the very thing he could have warned his father about and chose not to. He carries that knowledge like a stone lodged somewhere under the ribs. One sentence, spoken plainly on a draft of an order, and the silence that followed would have named the gallery too, and spared it. He meets Corin's eyes across the ruined hall and gives him the smallest nod, the quiet accuracy of a man conceding he lost to the better red of the board. Nothing more dramatic than that. The heir is the only Aldrich left standing who will spend the rest of his life knowing exactly how close his house came to winning it all. With the rank confirmed and the charge fully witnessed, the practical work begins at once. The evictions are reversed one by one, the tithes rolled back to what they should have been, the Vale lands placed under the protection only a top-ranked man can compel from an empire that now has no choice but to listen. Bevan carefully takes Marta's loom down from the gallery where it waited, and Marta tells Corin she'll weave him a proper collar, one that doesn't have to hide anything anymore, and he lets her, because hiding is over for him now, in every sense that matters. The old grain hauler mutters that a struck name still has to eat, same as any other. Corin tells him it eats free now, on land no one can strike again. The people he spent himself hollow to protect walk out of the hall together, under a name that can no longer be filed off, no matter who tries. That night, Corin sits alone with the blank bronze disc that started everything, the crest they ground his family's name off in a courtyard full of witnesses. He takes up a graver and cuts a new mark into it himself, not the old Vale sigil restored, but a single open eye, for the class that made him, and for the cost it charged him to become what he is. Senna asks if he's certain he wants that eye to be the family's mark forever, carried by whoever comes after him. He tells her a name should be the truest thing about a person, and the truest thing about him now, after everything, is that he will always be seen. By his rivals, by his house, by the empire that tried to erase him and instead taught him how to be witnessed. He closes his marked hand around the recut crest. 100 of 100. Top rank. His name unstruck and cut now in his own hand instead of his ancestors'. The narrator lands the ending looking ahead, not back. Corin Vale will never have a private moment again. House Aldrich will spend years answering for what it did in that courtyard. Senna's brand and Corin's 100 marks are both permanent, and none of that is undone. It has only, finally, been aimed the right way. It is not victory, only the shape of what comes next, carried openly instead of hidden. Somewhere out past the capital, 5 other great houses watched an empire learn that a struck name can witness itself back into existence, and every one of them is deciding, right now, what to do about a man who can never be hidden again and can never be ignored again. Corin turns the eye-cut crest over and over in his black-marked hand and thinks that whatever comes next, whatever House Aldrich tries, whatever the other houses decide, whatever the empire makes of a boy who turned his own erasure into rank one, it is all going to have to look him in the face.